Don't you dare, not for a second, not for a moment, not for any possible part of a day, take for granted what you are witnessing, Memphis Grizzlies fans. It is truly a sight to behold, something that we have never seen before. I was a doubter at first. Ja Morant's the greatest Grizzly of all time. I was not going to buy that. I defended Mike Conley, for goodness sakes. But you know what? That's done. I've seen enough, and I've probably said I've seen enough about 50 different times. Let's talk about it for the 50th time here on Locked On Grizzlies, how awesome Ja Morant is. Lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Grizzlies. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you're subscribing on YouTube, you're rating, reviewing, commenting, liking, however you take in the show, wherever you subscribe on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, however you get podcasts, however you view or listen to Locked On Grizzlies, please continue to do so. It is much appreciated, not just by me, but by my wonderful, my suave, I'm running out of superlatives. I got to do some Googling in my off time here coming up, ways to describe the commercial appeals. Damichael Cole, how are you doing?
Man, I'm great. First night of a back-to-back, we got that knocked out. Those back-to-backs, they're tough on the players, but don't underestimate how tough they are on us as well. It's nothing to cheese at, but things are great. I was just talking to Joe about this before we started. You try not to just ho-hum another big jaw dunk, another, 20-point quarter, a 21-point quarter, I think it was the best in his career, from that standpoint. But, he does this so much, Joe. How do we just continue to be amazed by it?
I'll simplify it even more for you, Damichael. How often do we overlook the fact that 95% of the time when we watch the Memphis Grizzlies play anyone in the National Basketball Association, Ja Morant, the best player on the floor, plays for them? I think that is kind of just at a bare bones level. I know I still do. Like I said in our opening part before we got started here, I need to stop. I'm doing my best to stop. But it's amazing because, again, you're obviously from Memphis. I've followed the team for over a decade now, and you remember Gilbert Arenas and Hamed Haddadi starting the Game 7 against the Clippers in 2012, or at least I do. You remember this team having struggles to score the basketball. Like that is what I came of age as a Memphis Grizzlies fan watching, and that is the exact opposite of what we're seeing now. And you have a superstar, legitimate, no question, top 5 in the NBA. We're not going to debate Luka and Jason Tatum. There's a lot of guys that are having phenomenal seasons. Anthony Davis is having a resurrection out in Los Angeles, looking like the AD of old. There are lots of dudes having awesome starts to this season. I'm not going to say Ja's better than all those guys. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to appreciate the gentleman from Murray State that puts on the Beale Street Blue on average every other night during basketball season and just wrecks people 95% of the time. It is truly a sight to behold, Damichael. And sometimes you just got to stand back. I know you're a journalist, you're professional, you're doing your job as best you can. It's a little easier for me, but even you on press row, sometimes you have to watch and go, how the hell did he just do that?
I think back to that Spurs game of all the games, when
Right.
I'm sitting right there and I'm watching this pass go over my head, go over everyone's head, the full length of the court from Steven Adams, and Ja catches it while fading out of bounds and knocks down the shot. And it's just like, we have to just sit here and just, oh, cool.
Appreciate it.
Nice play. And really soak that in, You really have to soak that in because you're not going to see that again. You're not going to see that again. But, I compared it to that third quarter against the Pistons to an all-star, game. Not even an all-star game, to an all-star weekend.
Sure.
I feel like when Ja went the full length of the court and he winded back for the dunk, I felt like when he was going full length of the court with the ball in his hands, that kind of reminded me of the skills competition. Then when he winded back the dunk, it felt like we were in the NBA dunk contest. Or when he threw the alley-oop dunk to Santi Aldama in transition, that felt like, the All-Star game and all the players are throwing the lobs to each other on Sunday night. Mm-hmm. And then we get towards the end of the third quarter, or maybe in the middle of the third quarter when he's dancing in the corner with Corey Joseph. He goes behind the back and he makes the three-pointer. And Corey Joseph, I think, by the way, is probably a top 10 point guard defender in the NBA.
He's pretty solid in that way. You're right.
He is really good in that area. So he dances over there with him and does the step back crossover and nails the three-pointer. And we don't see Ja nail a lot of those like off the dribble three-point shots.
Steph Curry-esque.
Steph Curry is right. And then speaking of Steph Curry, he's coming up the court in the last minute trying to get the 2-for-1, and he pulls up from 33, 34, 35 feet and nails the three-pointer. And I said this logo Ja is becoming a thing, but that reminded me of the 3-point contest. How many players can you say in one quarter of basketball they remind you of the Sunday night at an All-Star game with the alley-oops, and then they can go the full length of the court like in the skills competition when the players, trying to go in 25, 30 seconds in a, small amount of time, and then they pull up for three-pointers, and then they're winding back dunks outside of the restricted area. Ja's different, man. He's different, Joe. I don't know what else to say.
He's a different dude, and he displayed that against the Detroit Pistons on numerous occasions. Beautiful passing, his vision. We've talked about his handle before. I think that's an underrated part of his game. He has a really strong ability to create dribble penetration, not just because he's an elite athlete, but because he's elite at handling the basketball. I won't say he's better than Kyrie Irving. Whatever the tier is below Kyrie, I think it's fair to place him on. I was just amazed by that three-point shot, the difficulty of that, combining that handle we were just talking about, spatial awareness. Damichael, watching Ja Morant, and I mean this as a complete and total compliment, we all got started in sports not wanting, well, I can't speak for all of us. I'm guessing for me and you. We were playing the game. You know what I mean? We were out there running up and down the floor, and at some point the game tells you that you're not going to play anymore, right? The good thing about basketball is you can do pickup. But in terms of like a competitive, trying to win, whether you're 12, 18, 22, 42, if you're, Udonis Haslem, who we'll talk about here at the end of the show, whoever it might be, whatever the age, the game tells you you're done at the competitive level. We got into this because we appreciate that. We love the game of basketball. And outside of pickup, this is our connection to it now. He makes you feel like a kid. He really does. He makes you wonder what is possible for this person. And again, I mentioned all those names earlier. Didn't say Steph Curry, who's having a better season right now offensively than he did in his unanimous MVP season. So there's lots of guys that are playing really well. And I do not envy the All-NBA folks when the time comes, if this level of production is maintained. Because there are a lot of deserving players just in the Western Conference for the All-Star game. There's a lot of guys. Imagine choosing between SGA and OKC, De'Aaron Fox, Steph Curry, Devin Booker, Ja Morant. I just randomly named 5 guards, right? It's amazing to think how much talent is on display right now in the NBA.
I saw a stat, Joe, and I don't know how up to date and accurate it is at this point in time, but it was a couple days ago where there were 8 guys in the NBA averaging more than 30 points per game. That's the most at this point of a season, I think, since the merger. Mm-hmm. Like it's insane, and a lot of those guys are Western Conference players. I mean, and not even just guys that are averaging 30. You have guys having. I mean, I'm not sure if Anthony Davis is averaging 30 at this point, but what we've seen from him, I mean,
he's a monster.
He is. LeBron kept saying that he wants Anthony Davis to take the keys. This is what Anthony Davis taking the keys looks like. You have that guy, and of course, De'Aaron Fox having a career year. I see a lot of people in Sacramento, wanting him to get the attention. Luka leading the league with 33 points per game. And then Devin Booker, just had 3 games in a row with 40-plus points. Ja, of course. And Steph Curry, 50, 40, 90, ho hum, just regular business, for the chef. It's loaded competition. And you have Grizzlies fans saying, hey, we want Desmond Bane to be an all-star. Desmond Bane's averaging 25, 5, and 5, right? But it's gonna be tough. It is. I think Jaren, and we'll talk, more about that in the next segment. Just with Jaren Jackson Jr. and what he's done so far, he's probably going to position himself better for that all-star candidacy. Basically, because the front court positions aren't as loaded, especially when you consider these guys like Kawhi, Paul George, and so forth missing more games compared to backcourt and the wing. It's tough competition, but even with as tough as it is, Joe, I just want to end this segment basically saying Ja Morant still stands out, and that alone should be special to the people of Memphis, because you mentioned it. We had Mike Conley here. We had Jason Williams, who I think was arguably the flashiest. People loved White.
But definitely flashier. Yeah.
People loved the flash he brought to the game.
Mike, for the record, definitely flashier than Mike.
Yeah, I was one of those kids. We were in 5th grade, and we were in our class on YouTube when we go get 20 minutes on the computer, and we're looking up Jason Williams, passes and things like that. So there is that cultural relevancy there, but what Ja is doing, it's completely different than anything we've ever seen in Memphis.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it. It is special. Don't doubt it. Just appreciate it. He is a very special basketball player. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, whenever you want it, from a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget. Book an SUV or minivan for a family trip, pickup truck for some errands, or even test drive an EV. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. Ja Morant wasn't alone, right, Damichael? He obviously did remarkable things in that Pistons game. If you didn't get a chance to watch it, I highly recommend while you're here on YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're, just listening to the show at some point today, you need to check out the 10-minute highlights that the NBA does. I'm sure it'll be filled with Ja Morant stuff. Again, Grizzlies Pistons recap. NBA does an awesome job. You miss a game, it's 10 minutes, the key plays.
Just watch the third quarter. Just watch the third quarter.
Yeah, that's true too.
That's all you need.
But as Damichael alluded to in the previous segment, Jaren Jackson Jr., 22 points, really did an amazing job defensively, rebounding. He looked more active, more comfortable, especially on the offensive end. Brandon Clark had a double-double in the start with Steven Adams out. Up and down the roster, Damichael, every starter scored in double figures. Dylan Brooks didn't do it in the most efficient way, but he was an impactful defender, as he normally is. He made his presence known in this game. Ja gets the headlines. He's the highlight guy, clearly, understandably so. But it was a good night in Detroit on Sunday night for the other guys as well.
It was a great night. It was a great night. And all things considered, just looking at the stats here, and it was an efficient night, down the roster. Even, with Dylan Brooks, I don't know how most people feel about this, but you look at it, 7 of 20 from the field. Personally,
Rudy Gay effect. That is probably what a lot of people that have been around for a while are thrown off by. That's how Rudy Gay used to get his 20 points.
With the defense he plays, Joe, if he's shooting 7 of 20, but 5 of 10 from 3-point range,
sure,
give me that.
I'd agree,
because that's what 15. That's 19 points, that you get off of 20 shots, so to say. So that's almost the equivalent of a guy shooting 9 of 20 and making all twos, because you get 18 points off of that. So that's how I look at it. Like, again, that's why teams are shooting more 3-pointers and stuff right now, because of all those little analytical things and whatnot. But Dylan Brooks, even 7 of 20, okay, but 5 of 10 from 3-point range, and he made some big ones, right?
Impressive.
He made some really big shots. I thought he was great. You mentioned Jaren Jackson Jr., and the thing about Jaren is he's forceful. We talked about it, but I mean, I keep saying it because let's be honest. We've seen him be forceful before just to go back the next game and shoot 8 3-pointers and shoot 4 2-pointers.
Right. Very inconsistent, and it was even limited. Even when he was forceful, it would be for a stretch and a quarter, right? Yeah. It was almost like there'd be a particular matchup going into the game they had talked about as a coaching staff with the players. And Jaren, very coachable player, I think that's fair to say, in terms of watching him to this point. Yeah. He would do what he was told to do, and then he switched assignments, whatever might have occurred, he would go away from it. That has happened much less this season.
Yeah, and I mean, it's good to see him being consistently be this way, because you look at it, 22 points for him in this game, but it's 7 of 13 shooting. It's just 2 of 4 on 3-pointers. So he wasn't even, not shooting 3-pointers that much. The most impressive thing to me, remember I said I want him to average more than 6 free throw attempts this season, 7 free throw attempts. And if you looked early in the game, all of this is coming off the dribble where he's just going at guys, and they're too little. They're too small. They don't have a chance. They started Isaiah Stewart off on him, and Isaiah Stewart is like the small ball center type guy, a lot of energy. I think he's like 6'8" in stature, but, he plays much bigger than that. So, and he's a solid defender overall. But the way Jaren was going at him, I think I was like, that's food for Jaren.
Yeah.
And
Beef
he
Stew is that guy's nickname, by the way. Beef Stew was literally eaten alive by Jaren.
He was gonna be some beef stew, all right. Like they had to switch that matchup, in that game. And I mean, I haven't seen Jaren just realize it as much as it looked like he has so far. But it goes further than those two. Brandon Clark, we haven't mentioned. Steven Adams did not play in this game, and you wondered, okay, the biggest thing that you miss without Steven Adams is, of course, the screen setting, the rebounding. A couple times, Brandon Clark really set some nice screens that helped set him up for easy scoring opportunities with Ja Morant. When Ja Morant early on in the game, I think Ja only had 7 points in the first half. So there was a lot of getting guys involved, and Brandon Clark in the first quarter was the biggest, beneficiary of that. And 14 points, 14 rebounds. I mean, forceful night. Let's be honest here. Some people have kind of had questions about his rebounding this season. I thought last season, he was a really solid. You see, Joe just raised his hand because Joe has wondered as well. Myself,
I've called him out on the show. Him and Tyus both. They both needed to do more, and Brandon Clark in this game did more, no doubt.
And that's where it's like, okay, that's where the money comes in. You paid this guy his money. You paid him because in situations like this, okay, Steven Adams, first night of a back-to-back, he's going to miss this game. You don't want to miss a beat. 14 points, 14 rebounds. Those were Steven Adams' numbers from him. Then you go down to the bench. Our guy, Sean Coleman, I saw he put out a tweet, mentioning that David Roddy, I think he shot 25, 26, 27% from three-point range in his first so many games. And then you break down the back half of those games. Since then, he shot 11 of 27 on his last 27 three-point attempts.
If only this could have been predicted.
If only this could have been predicted, right? It's
just one game. But
if only people knew this guy was a rookie, and and it's I'm sure over the course of the season he's going to have more stretches where he shoots like 2 of 20 over a stretch or things like that. It's the ebbs and flows of a young player. But with me, when it comes to the bench, what I noticed in this game is the Grizzlies went with the 9-man rotation. If you watch the beginning of the second quarter in that game, they gave up a little run, right? Ja Morant goes out, they give up a run. Those things were corrected at the beginning of the fourth quarter. Ja Morant goes out. I think it was an 18-point lead. It got knocked down to 14. They went into the fourth quarter up 18. It gets knocked down to 14. You know what I'm thinking, Joe? Like, I don't know how long they're going to allow Ja to sit over there, because you don't want this to get to single digits. And then, before you know it, Jaren Jackson Jr., boom. Dylan Brooks, of course, couple big shots. Next thing you know, Grizzlies have a 20-point lead, timeout Pistons, biggest lead of the night. What Taylor Jenkins is learning to do and what he's learning to mix and match, because if you just look at the bench guys' numbers, nothing really stands out. I think, statistic-wise, looking at those guys, I think, no one scored more than 6 points. Xavier Tillman had 6 points. Santi Aldama had 5 points. Tyus Jones had 5. David Roddy had 4. No one, coming off the bench lighting it up. I think Sadiq Bey had a real big night off the bench for the Pistons. But what we noticed, Joe, is they're mixing those guys. We've talked about this, right? Jaren Jackson Jr., playing a lot of minutes with that unit. Dylan Brooks started the fourth quarter with that unit. Eventually, you're probably going to take Brooks out and replace Desmond Bane in that role. But, Joe, I think that's an encouraging development as to see how they continue to mix that to kind of overcome, some of the deficiencies of the bench right now.
And Xavier Tillman is somebody that you and I both have criticized on this show.
How about him, Joe? How about him?
He looked functional in this game. Now, again, context matters, right? Detroit is not actively trying to be particularly good this year. And obviously, Cade Cunningham didn't play in this game, one of their key contributors, one of their core players. So the Grizzlies did the professional thing. They went in and beat a team that they were supposed to beat in a manner that they were supposed to do it, and the starters in particular looked great. Ja Morant was excellent, but so were the rest of the Grizzlies. So kudos to you, Grizzlies. Thankfully, you have, less than 20 hours now to get some rest. As you listen to this on, Monday, obviously they've got 12 hours, 10 hours, 8 hours. It's a countdown back to back coming with the Miami Heat. We'll be talking about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. First, thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by betonline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends from every professional and amateur league out there. Football, basketball, soccer, esports, they've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those on BetOnline as well. They are the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Damichael, no rest for the weary, right? I know you'll be there in person covering it at FedEx Forum, watching the Memphis Grizzlies take on the Miami Heat, a Miami Heat team that before we started recording, you and I had been talking. I'm surprised they're under 500, but again, context matters. The fact that Jimmy Butler has missed so much time early in the season is a major reason for that. The Heat are still a very good basketball team, but they're getting older. And when you lose one key piece of that, it's not like Kyle Lowry can do what he has done in the past. They obviously have Tyler Hero still on the roster, Bam Adebayo. There's other pieces that the Grizzlies are going to have to be concerned about both here and in the future, depending on health. But the biggest thing for this one for me, Damichael, is the Grizzlies just are coming back from Detroit. The Miami Heat are literally waiting for them, right? So the Heat have that rest factor. The Heat haven't traveled as much. Second night of a back-to-back. The Pistons game wasn't as intense as it could have been, so that probably saved their legs some. But at the same time, the Heat are a force to be reckoned with, especially now that Butler is back in the fold.
Yeah, when the Heat have Jimmy Butler, all bets are off. I think in the stretch when he didn't play, they had a 3-game losing streak in there, and there was some struggles overall. But his first game back was Friday against the Celtics, and they won. They beat the Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown Celtics. I believe it was an overtime game, but Jimmy Butler was back and he was effective. And you can just see when he plays, it's a completely different team. They played that same Boston team right before that, and let's just say, the game didn't look the same way by a long shot. So Jimmy Butler's effectiveness on the game is something I've always admired. Even from when he was in Philly, he was a guy who came to Philly immediately, and they were one of the weirdest bounces we've ever seen in NBA playoff history. And they lose to the team that eventually wins the NBA title in a game 7. So, and then he goes, to Minnesota, lifts them to the postseason, then, plays with the third stringers and beats up on Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Wiggins. But all that's beside the point here. The point is the Heat with Jimmy Butler, they are a challenge. But you mentioned the other challenge. The other challenge is the schedule. We talked about it earlier, in the season. We talked about schedule losses and things like that. Sometimes the schedule puts you at a disadvantage. It goes both ways. The Grizzlies will be playing teams. They'll be that team that has a couple days off from sometimes, and they'll be playing a team on the second night of a back-to-back. But where it's really tough is this is a travel back-to-back. If the Grizzlies had 2 home games, it's still tough, but now you got to go get on a plane. Now you're flying back, you're not going to have shoot around because the Grizzlies don't have shoot arounds on the second nights of back to back usually. So you factor all that in. It's a quick turnaround. And you mentioned a big part of this. They're going to play a refreshed team that's had a couple days off, and a team that's got Jimmy Butler back, and Kyle Lowry's been playing some really good basketball. Bam Adebayo, while Jimmy Butler was out, I mean, he is put together. You know, people have talked about what he can do offensively and scoring wise. Really looking forward to, Steven Adams potentially. We'll see what his status is. But Steven Adams and Brandon Clark and just Jaren Jackson Jr., right, how those guys, the effectiveness that they have against Bam Adebayo. And one more thing, people know I love the mind games. Like, some people get tired of me talking about this stuff. Say, oh, Damichael, it doesn't have anything to do with the game. But Jimmy Butler and Dylan Brooks, that's one of those mind games made in heaven matches. These are two guys who get under people's skins the most. So when I see this is one of those matchups where I'm happy I'm in the arena because, when you go to those commercial breaks, Joe, you can look at them. Let's see if Dylan Brooks is going to walk towards the Heat bench a little bit and, nudge Jimmy Butler on the shoulder a little bit while he's walking. Those little veteran savvy moves that both these guys tend to do. Looking forward to seeing that too. I think this is overall going to be a really cool game. Two really good teams, another really good challenge for the Grizzlies on this homestand coming up.
I'm interested to see, you mentioned the reserves earlier in the show and how they weren't anything special, right? They didn't hurt the team against the Pistons, but they didn't help. Tyler Hero is the reigning sixth man of the year. He is coming off a pretty impressive contract signing that Desmond Bane will blow out of the water more than likely here in about 8 months or so, or 7 months. But the point is, and the fact remains, that the Heat are deeper than the Grizzlies at this point. Plus, you add in the fact that Miami is more rested. I think that the scheduled loss point is an important one to point out. If they fall to Miami, it makes it a little bit more palatable since they took care of business against the Pistons. You want them to win, of course. And again, they are there at home, so they should have that opportunity to be able to do something competitive. But I do caution everyone to remember that the Grizzlies are still down Desmond Bane. They're still down Zaire Williams. Not a perfect situation for the Grizzlies. The Heat are getting healthy. So keep that perspective going into this game. I'm with you on wanting to watch Bam Adebayo play. He's phenomenal defensively. That's kind of his claim to fame. He's similar to Jaren Jackson Jr. in that way. His offensive game continues to develop.
Some people in Miami will say he's better than Jaren Jackson Jr.
Sure. And I think in some ways there's probably some, I don't want to say fairness to it because obviously I'm biased and I would say Jaren is better. I think Jaren's ceiling is higher, especially as a perimeter defender. But Adebayo is pretty fleet of foot himself. That's going to be a really fun matchup, especially when Jaren slides in at the 5.
It is. It is. And I mean, you mentioned him being fleet of foot, but I think, when I think of Bam, he's power.
Oh, yeah.
I think of that block he had where his hand was bent back. Was that against the Celtics a couple seasons ago?
So.
And, yeah, when his hand is bent back in the rim and the ball is right there from going in the basket and he blocks the shot. Or I think back to when I was in college and Kentucky came to UT and he's shaking the whole basket, with his dunks, and we're just like, don't break our baskets, man. I mean, he is power. It's going to be a really fun matchup. I wrote a story 2 days ago about Steven Adams matching up against the different centers in the NBA. And in that story, he kind of talks about, how he prepares against different guys and how it's fun, because you prepare against Jokic a different way and you compare against Embiid a different way. Then Rudy Gobert, a lot of times against him, you're not leaving the paint. For the most part of the game, you're sagging off. Whereas when you're playing Embiid, you're guarding hesitation dribbles and things like that. Bam Adebayo has done a really good job of expanding his game in that way. So it's going to be a fun matchup if that's the matchup that we get. That's going to be a fun matchup. Jimmy Butler, we talked about it. Miami has those shooters. You remember, now it was preseason, but it's worth bringing up. Duncan Robinson shot off against this team. And right now you can make an argument. Max Strus, Caleb Martin, those guys have been really, Miami is one of those teams. You look at the front of the jersey, you don't look at the back. They're one of those type teams. Who cares what the back of the jersey says? It doesn't matter. If you see Miami across the front, or you see Heat across the front, you better guard that guy. And Max Strus, Caleb Martin, they both can really get buckets as well. It's going to be good to see, how the Grizzlies chase these shooters around because, Jimmy Butler and Bam and those guys are really going to be looking for them. We've talked about how the Grizzlies have been guarding the three-point line. And remember, we haven't talked much bad about it lately because, Joe, they've been improved. They've really improved, and it's kind of coincided with the return of Jaren Jackson Jr. So, again, in this matchup, this is going to be another good test. Miami Heat have some guys. If they see one, they see two go in. 5 could go in before you know it. This is just a really good all-around matchup. All things considered, where the Grizzlies are at this point of the season, 14-9 near the top of the Western Conference. This is a good test.
A good test, good measuring stick. I think they were talking about that on the broadcast. You want measuring stick games, see where you're at. When spring comes around, the Miami Heat are going to be talked about as NBA Finals contenders. They may not make it there, but they'll be in that conversation. The Memphis Grizzlies want to be in that conversation in the Western Conference. This is a good opportunity to see exactly where Memphis stands. Thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. For your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights that only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. The next time Locked On Grizzlies is up, Damichael, we will have another game to discuss, that Miami Heat game that's occurring tonight in Memphis. And then, of course, the aftermath of that, hopefully being there home in person, we'll have some updated injury ideas, at least timeline things, Zaire and Desmond continuing to ramp up. All I want for Christmas, Damichael, is a healthy Grizzlies roster. Fingers crossed that is coming our way. So make sure you guys are checking out Locked On Grizzlies for that. Damichael, do you have anything dropping at the commercial appeal that you want to mention?
Oh, there's something that I'll mention later in the week. We're gonna save that later in the week. Something that I'm really working on that I think people will appreciate. But as of right now, nothing else worth mentioning other than just our normal, day-to-day coverage, where the Grizzlies are about to have a long, lengthy homestand. So they're going to be more practice updates. That includes Zaire Williams, Desmond Bane, and just their overall recovery process and all things there. So stay tuned for all of that as well.
Very good. Excited to hear that. And make sure you're following Damichael at Damichael C. Follow me on Twitter at Ja Mullinax. Rate, review, subscribe, however you get podcasts, however you get YouTube videos. Make us a part of your Grizzlies and NBA experience and continue to give us feedback. It is much appreciated. For Damichael, I am Joe. Until next time, stay locked in, Grizzlies fans. This is Locked On Grizzlies.